Let me tell you another story about a more classic dictator, Gaddafi. Libya has been trying to clean up its act. It realizes it needs Western investment, and so it needs to kind of come back into the community of nations. And so it stopped supporting terrorism. It's dismantled its nuclear program. It's paid off the Lockerbie victims. One of the big problems Gaddafi had, though, was his human rights record. And so he invited Human Rights Watch in for what he thought would be a clean bill of health. He opened up his prisons. We talked to people. We did a usual investigation. The one condition was we promised that we would show him the report before we went public. So I went to Tripoli and delivered the report and walked into the meeting with the ministers of justice and interior and foreign affairs, and they were very upset. We had completely misunderstood Libya. You know, they were expecting, you know, this glowing report, and in fact we were talking about political prisoners and torture and lack of civil society and no free press. And they spent about 5 hours berating us, how we just completely got this wrong. At the end of which, we basically delivered the message, look it guys, you know, we have a press conference in 2 days in Cairo, and they're going to ask us, how did your conversations in Tripoli go? They've already got the report. We can either say they were terrible, all they did was yell at us, or we can say, yeah, they were actually very productive and they made various reforms. So, you know, they said, we got to talk to our superiors. They dismissed us for the night. Next morning, we get a phone call. We walk in, totally different atmosphere. All the books are open. They're showing us information, lovey-dovey. We gave them a list of 130-some political prisoners released within 2 weeks. And it just shows if you sort of figure out what the government wants and can condition that on changes in behavior, you can get those changes. Let me give you another example. The Tamil Tigers, one of the world's leading users of child soldiers. This is the rebel group in Sri Lanka. We asked, well, what does it care about? What it cared about was money. It raised money in the Tamil diaspora. And apart from India, where was the biggest Tamil diaspora? It was in Toronto. So we went to Toronto and we looked at how did the Tamil Tigers raise money. We found out that they did it through extortion. They would go to the Tamil community and say, you want to visit your relatives in Sri Lanka? Pay up. You're a doctor, that's $20,000 a year. You know, you're a teacher, $3,000 a year. Overt extortion. We documented it in a report, published it. It created a stir, needless to say. Canada promptly responded by declaring the Tamil Tigers a terrorist organization, cutting off the flow of arms. And I'm happy to say Ann Veneman is here today. UNICEF just reported that the Tigers' use of child soldiers has plummeted. So even a terrorist group, even a rebel group, can make a big difference. Now, these techniques also can be used against the US government. You may remember about 2.5 years ago, Dana Priest at the Washington Post had a front page story. The CIA is maintaining secret detention centers in Eastern Europe, but I'm not allowed to say where the CIA asked not to mention it. Human Rights Watch that afternoon named Poland and Romania because we had been tracking the flights. Once that was revealed, it was of course too embarrassing for Poland and Romania to keep those centers there. They were promptly shut down. They were moved briefly to North Africa, and then within a couple of months, Bush closed them and moved everybody to Guantanamo, which doesn't sound great, but at least there, the people were no longer disappeared. They were no longer subject to torture.
I was in Memphis to march with Martin Luther King in support of the sanitation workers, and he was then assassinated. And all of us assembled that next day in recognition of his glorious life, his glorious contributions to our lives, and we held that march. Something of an irony for me, just 2 or 3 years later, as the consequence of an acquisition that Harman International made, we came into ownership of a plant in the town of Bolivar, Tennessee, some 30 miles removed from the location of Martin Luther King's last day. That plant sat in the most retrogressive area of the United States. The incidence of alcoholism, of drug abuse, of suicide were the highest in the nation. And Charles Dickens once visited me in that plant and said, "Come on, Sidney, you must be kidding." The place was a horror. The town and the county of which it was the headquarters regarded the Civil War as an event that either had never occurred or the South had won. The worst thing a young black man could do in that area was to work in that facility because, in fact, there were no young black men. If you were 40 years or older in Bolivar, Tennessee, you were, if you were black, an old man. The company made side view mirrors for the automakers. There was a department, the worst in the place, called the Polish and Buff Department. The 13 old black men working the Polish and Buff Department were obliged to spend their time holding zinc castings against buffing wheels to polish those castings so that they might then be painted to match the body colors of the automobiles. That buffing compound sprayed in the air, clogged their brains and their minds. It was a terrible place to work. And then one night on the second shift, an event occurred that changed my life. There was a buzzer scheduled to sound at 10 p.m. to announce a 10-minute coffee break, and the buzzer had failed. Local management, in its infinite wisdom, determined no problem. We know how to activate a buzzer at 10 minutes after 10. We'll simply shift the coffee break. Then it was that one of those old black men with the wonderful biblical name Noby Cross changed my life. Said Noby Cross, I don't work for no buzzer. The buzzer works for me. I got me a watch. I know when it's 10 o'clock, he went off to his coffee break and his 12 colleagues went with him. All hell broke loose. There I was, sitting in my celestial office, in my pinstriped suit in, as you would guess, Lake Success, Long Island, when I received the call, you had better get your rear end down here. This place is in civil eruption. I went to Bolivar, and I began to apply the lessons I learned in this college, which focused on learning from bottom up, the student responsible for his, her own education, the faculty as resource, the very antipathy, the inverse of the tradition in America of top-down education. And I realized that while I was doing that, I was running my company in the opposite direction, autocratic, authoritative, command down. Moved by Noby Cross, I decided to apply the lessons of the college to the factory. We began, if I had time, I'd give you the detail of it, the damnedest school in the factory, on factory time, on factory premises, not how to do a better job of soldering or using the lathe, but people went to classes that other employees were willing to teach because they knew something. Class in piano, class in writing. The culture of that plant was totally changed over the years, and as a consequence, those people changed the culture of the city. They ran for the city council, for the Board of Education. We made a difference.